Hello everybody, this is Jeannie Pirtle from Historic Sotterley, and thank you for joining me. Thank you to all our regular viewers. Um, this is an interactive event, so you are welcome to comment, to ask questions, to talk to each other, to react to at any time on this program. Today's questions and your interaction will be managed by Catherine Humphreys. And if there's an in-depth question that can't really be answered adequately, either Catherine can forward that to me or my email is education@sotterley.org. And I picked one of my favorite spots here. And I will show you the spot in a moment. So today we're talking about the Civil War and slavery and its aftermath. Well, that's a lot, so I won't be covering every detail and by any means, but part of what this is about is to give you a few insights and clues and a little bit about the history and a few resources so that you can go and explore on your own. People always learn better when they've found it themselves, when they've discovered it themselves, instead of just being told this is the way it is. It's always a better way to learn anyway. So instead of me prattling on like I've got a week to do a webinar, I won't do that. I'll let you see this beautiful view, and I'll just give you a few things to think about today. So welcome, and I'm going to change my view here so you can see what I'm seeing. Whoa, beautiful. You see the flag back there. You see the river in the distance. Let me try to get it. Yeah. Okay. So you can see all of that, and the sun is changing as we speak. So the sun will move in this hour. So I hope you can see how beautiful that is in the garden. All right. So the Civil War at Sotterley. Well, first of all, you've got to understand the border state idea. So during the Civil War, when states started leaving the Union, President Lincoln could not allow some of the border states that bordered the North from the South. He did not want them to secede, and he did everything in his power and then some to keep them from doing so. So part of that strategy was allowing some states that had slavery to be guaranteed that they could keep the institution of slavery and while being in the Union. Now, not everybody in that state would be happy about what was going on, but Maryland, Delaware, Kentucky, and Missouri were all border states. So I'm a native Missourian, so I kind of get this. So that meant they were officially Union states, but they kept slavery, and many people, Maryland is south of the Mason-Dixon, so many people many people and families in Maryland were upset about, number one, Lincoln being elected president in the first place, and then the affairs of being a part of a Union state. They quickly joined the Confederate cause. So if you have ancestors from border states, it's totally normal for you to have ancestors that fought for the Confederacy and that fought for the Union, different ones that fought for the Union. That's totally normal. That is what is in my family tree from Missouri. So some of this history, though, is not passed on because now I get visitors sometimes from Baltimore or different places, and they act like, oh, the slavery thing was just down here in southern Maryland. Oh, no, 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 no. We were a slave state. And it was only during the ratification of a new state constitution in Maryland that included the banning of slavery. That wasn't passed just with everybody's vote that could vote then. Who could vote then? That's another question. You can think about it. If you think about it, you'll know. I don't have to tell you. So if you it wasn't even passed to go into as a constitution until the Union soldiers from Maryland came back to vote, and then it passed. So getting rid of slavery was not popular in Maryland, and I'll admit in Southern Maryland also, but not just. Remember the Pratt Street riots in Baltimore. Baltimore is set up like a southern town, and it's still, we still have this legacy left from the institution of slavery, and it didn't just start with the Civil War. So a lot of times school children, I know that's the way I was taught, go to school, and the first time they hear about slavery might be when you're talking about the Civil War. And that should not be the first time you've ever heard of slavery in a history lesson. Slavery was a part of our history in the colonial period in American history, in U.S. history, and and it just kept progressing. And the Civil War is a dividing line between the end of slavery as an institution, but the legacy that's left behind is mind-numbing, tragic, crippling, and part of what is going on right now in our country that is so apparent. Of course, this was no secret to a lot of people, right? This is part of that legacy. We're still trying to get rid of this, overcome this legacy that was left and never seems to go away, never seems to get much better. Of course, through all the years since emancipation, remember, can anybody tell me the year that emancipation happened in Maryland? Can anybody tell me? Anybody? Yeah. So think about it. When the Emancipation Proclamation went out, Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation, that applied to only rebellious states. So it did not apply to border states. So were the enslaved automatically free in border states in Maryland, like Maryland, with the Emancipation Proclamation? No, they were not. So it took our state, Maryland State Constitution, to do that. That barely passed. So the people at Sotterley, a similar story. I always say Sotterley is a microcosm of American history, and it really is. It covers really American history. We get specific with the families and the certain people that were actually lived here, worked here, were enslaved here, but it's really an American story. So the Briscoe family that owned Sotterley during the Civil War, they were definitely Confederate, and there's a lot of evidence documentary evidence to prove that fact. They were definitely Confederates. I don't even really say that they were sympathizers, really. They were more than sympathizers, okay? They had 3 sons that went to fight for the Confederacy. It was the 1st Maryland. It was, they went to Virginia and signed up, the three of the brothers. They all survived the war and came back home. We have at least one, and I talked about this also in other episodes that I've done, so I won't go into detail about every single one of these because somewhere I already have. But George W. Briscoe, alias Barnes, we know that he went to the Union Colored Troop, 7th Regiment, Company I. Okay, and so we know his story because I think I've covered that before. So go to a different episode. Probably I covered it in a few because it's a very important story, but I don't have really time to cover all of that again now. But go back and look. It's in there. It's in our stuff. So definitely, even Sotterley was divided during the Civil War. Just look at the butterflies. I'll let it fly over. Okay, so even Sotterley was divided, but the aftermath, the legacy afterwards. So slavery, just because slavery has ended by what year did we say? 1864. Okay, 1864, November 1st. That's Maryland Emancipation Day. Even being it's no longer legal to own enslaved people. That doesn't end the legacy. So remember, slavery is especially in America, was a racially based institution. So some of the resources that Catherine Humphrey should have, I know she posted these on the Facebook page. It starts out with a really good resource from the Smithsonian about talking about slavery. So that's the picture you'll see on it. But if you click on, you want to read more, there's these other resources that I will give you. And you can just click on it and see for yourself. So one of these resources is the census. So this, I told you I've had several people I've had to inform or let them know that the census is in our own national constitution. So ever since the Constitution was ratified, every 10 years, the United States takes a count of everyone that lives here. Now, that's a little tricky when you talk about the enslaved, because enslaved were not counted in the census really until about 1870 officially. Now there's other ways they were counted, so you have to look at, remember I talked about, you have to look at all the like slave schedules. You need to look at wills and bills of sale and runaway ads, all of those kinds of financial deeds, property ownership. All of those kinds of documents can lead you to find your ancestor if they were enslaved. But we call the first census, where really African Americans were counted, enslaved African Americans were counted in the census, in 1870. So in genealogy, we call that the 1870 wall, because it's really more difficult to trace your ancestry past that if your ancestors were enslaved. But then you see, it's required that everybody has to put down their quote unquote race. So you have white, the big W, right? You have black, the big B, and then you have M for mulatto and whatever else the rules were at the time. So one of the resources I gave you was an excellent chart, and it is actually from the Census Bureau itself. So that is a government operation, right? But it's a link to a really good chart that it's so visual and so amazing, because you can see from the beginning of the first census to the last census, which took place when? 2010, right? So you can see how the census and the way we count people changed over time. So that's really going to pop out at you. That's really going to pop out at you. You'll be able to notice, the separation of free people, black people, and white people. So that's separation. There's Native American separation. So then you can tell when a lot of immigration is happening, because now all of a sudden there's a different category for Chinese people, Japanese, Asian descent, any Asian descent. So it just gives you a really good jar just to see how they categorize people in the United States Census over the decades. It's a must-see. You have to look at it and investigate it, because it's really clear what's going on there just from looking at the graph. Okay, someone will probably ping me on this because I'm not going into it today, but yes, I know a race is a made-up concept, is a construct. It was made up about the same time as our founding of America was getting started, or right before. But that's all a made-up construct in the first place. I won't get all into that right now, but it's true. So just think about that. I'll just give you a biblical example. The Ethiopian eunuch, they didn't say he was a black man, did they? No, they said he was Ethiopian, right? And that's the way you used to think about people, is where they're from, or where they were located. You didn't talk about, oh, they're black and they're white. I had someone I know, I don't know her real well, but I'm in a different organization with her, and she's from Africa, the continent. So she said she didn't know she was black until she moved to the United States. And, we were telling funny kind of things we go through back and forth between the races. It was a great conversation. I wish I had it recorded, but it was so great. But it's true. So race itself is an artificial construct. But in the United States, it's used to keep people powerless and weak, so that their labor can be exploited. And no, I haven't forgotten that slavery right now, we have more people enslaved right now in the world than we ever had. I know that. I know this. So a lot of it has to do with the sex trades and that kind of thing. But yes, it still goes on in our world, and we have to realize that. So just that census, it is a must-see. It tells the story right there in front of your eyes. And I got corrected a couple of weeks ago. We were talking in my different organization that I belong to. So we were talking about, we're going through an organizational kind of equality training for the whole organization, and we were talking about telling stories, and I was talking about how everybody's personal story is so powerful, and and I said, you can't deny someone's story, and I got quickly corrected, and I'm so glad she corrected me, because that's not true, is it? Facts can be right in front of our faces. So, of course, people don't believe people's personal stories if they don't want to. They don't believe facts that are right in front of them. So, I was so glad she corrected my error. And that's the kind of things we have to do for each other. I know it takes trust, but that's what we have to do. So anyway, I just thought I'd share that. So back to the resources. Another good resource, and I could teach like 3 college courses on this. So, but I've only got a little bit of time. You can't teach the whole thing in an hour. I'm sorry. But what the most important thing is, I said, you go and investigate and do your own research. That's the best way to learn anyway. Okay, so I have another link on there. It's the U.S. Supreme Court, United States versus Mr. Tynd. It's the case number. It's from 1923. So I have this titled, Part of the History of Codifying Whiteness as the Norm. This is just one example. So you can read it for yourself, but basically the down low is that this person was Indian, from the country of India. He was from a very high caste. So if you understand the caste system in India, his family was well-to-do and in a high caste. But they were, anybody brown, they were trying to the country was trying to keep them from becoming U.S. citizens. And Mr. Tynd argued this point that I'm a U.S. citizen. I'm not, I need to, I'm from a well-to-do family in India. I have done all the things I need to do, and I need my citizenship. Well, the long story short, he was denied because he didn't fit the definition of white. So what is the definition in America of white? Anybody that's not brown or black, or anyone that's, if you're Native American, you're not white. So this is another thing when you're discussing slavery. Some white people will say, you're trying to talk about slavery in America, African American slavery, and all that, and they'll pipe up and say stuff like this. Well, what about the Native Americans? And you know what I always say? Well, what about them? And it's annoying to some people, but I ask another question. What about them? Well, they went through genocide. I said, I know. They went through genocide. And why is that? Because they weren't white. Because they weren't white European. Their land was taken from them. Their people were killed, annihilated. Because why? So whenever we talk about slavery in America, and we talk about African American slavery, the chattel slavery that we had in America, when we can understand how all of this happened, and we can understand and grow our empathy. We have knowledge so we can grow our hearts, right? We need more knowledge to grow our hearts, to unnumb our conscience, because that's what you had to do when you owned slaves. You had to numb your conscience, didn't you? So whenever we help anyone, we are helping all. So, white people sometimes, that's the last thing they would rather talk about anything. I don't care what, but they don't want to talk about the subject of slavery. Right now, it's being shoved in everybody's faces really closely right now. So, hey, kneeling in the football game doesn't seem quite so bad now, does it? So that is that is what we're talking about. So with a Christian worldview, I see God working in all this, but it may not be your worldview, but it's just the right thing to do. So hopefully, we always hope that this will be the time for real change. But a cautionary tale, just like back after the Civil War, okay, I'll skip back to the Civil War. Just like the Civil War, and the, right after, you had troops going down and making sure African Americans, the Freedmen's Bureau, but there was a lot of people trying to re-enslave people under some other guise, or they were just ignoring the fact that there was no longer slavery, so it had to be enforced by the U.S. government. If you had a chance to watch the History Channel program on Grant, that was one of the best History Channel documentaries, and usually some of their stuff is not as good, but I recommend that one. Because it really explained this part really well, this Reconstruction part. And then because John Wilkes Booth wanted to do the South a favor, he and his cohorts assassinated President Lincoln, and then pretty soon the will of the United States was not in a place where they wanted to continue with Reconstruction. They just wanted to forget about the Civil War. Right? They want to forget about the whole thing. But they left business undone. So soon you have you have oppression, you don't have opportunity, you have racism, you have voter suppression, you have no access to any government programs whatsoever, hardly, except the Freedmen's Bureau was a good thing. So, you have all of this going on, and then you have the 60s, and you put up. Now I see pictures of Martin Luther King going up by some of my white relatives and friends. Good intentions, but you have to remember the context when everybody sees Martin Luther King Jr. as a peacemaker now, right? The way to follow. But when he was actually alive, he was persecuted. He was thrown in jail. He was beaten. He was assassinated. He talked peace, but that didn't protect him from the violence and the reality of what was going on. So that's the difference. We can... And it's just an internal examination of our hearts is what we need. We need education about what the real facts are. Get rid of our myths. Get rid of our preconceived ideas. And get an education in this subject and ask the right people. When I need advice or I need to know if I am doing stuff wrong, I go to my African American community. I go to my friends who have been there and done that, who lived through the riots in Washington, D.C. before. I go to those friends and I ask them, is this right? Am I doing this right? Am I saying this right? And another thing that bothers white people that they get defensive about, they don't understand when they see one African American leader think we should fix our problems one way and another one says that we should do it another way. Now, white people just don't understand that, right? You know why? It's because white people are seen as individuals and black people are seen as all in one lump. That's why. Of course, African American people are individuals. They have different choices, just like we talked about before in slavery, about running away. You know, they had different choices. They're individuals. The same thing here. There's as many people with a different idea about how to solve some of our problems as they are people, because they're individuals. And that's another legacy, of slavery, is being lumped in, everybody being lumped into groups. It just is not, it isn't fair, right? It isn't fair. You wouldn't like that done to you, and African Americans don't like it done to them. So these are the kinds of things that you can go back in history, and you can see, even from the founding of America to the Civil War. Now, if you want to know some details about Sotterley's Civil War, you can look that up. I mean, we another link I gave you is the Civil War Trails. We are part of the Maryland Civil War Trails. There's a link in there that tells you all about it. I think I showed the Civil War Trails sign already when I did a whole program on signs, so you can go back to that and look at that if you want to know. It has all the regiments and all those kinds of details that people belong to. But I'm not going to get into all that today. So go back and look at it because I've already covered that somewhere. But it's good to know. That kind of information is really good to know. So those are the resources. And we are still going through this today. I mean, I'm encouraged to see some people actually repenting of what they said before and saying, I don't know what I'm talking about. Please forgive me. I think that is awesome. Our tendency, though, if you look at history tendencies, things started pretty well after the Civil War and Reconstruction. There were a lot of African Americans, males, elected to Congress, leaders, mayors. I mean, it was looking really rosy. It was looking up, right? But all that changed, and I've talked about this before too, around the time of the centennial of the United States, 1876. People wanted to forget, and they wanted to remember the good old days during the founding. And what happens in the good old days is you have slavery, right? You have African American suppression. You have the pushing back of anyone that's not white, or opportunities. So all our institutions, justice, education, economic, health, you name it, all were built with this insidious bias toward in favor of white people and against people of color. And you see the stats, you see it right now. I don't even have to tell you. You know that this pandemic is hurting the African American community in a higher percentage than anybody else, and that goes across the board. You can look it up. It's across the board in all the institutions. African American last, even after the Hispanic, even after Indians from India, Native Americans. It's bad. So this is the kind of stuff that I know some of your ancestors have been upset about and have given their lives to stop and change. And so hopefully after the pandemic is over, and we get comfortable again, we have to stay diligent, because if we don't stay diligent and keep learning and keep changing, we tend to slip back into our old ways. And that's happened over and over. So we tend to slip back in our old ways. So as a white person, I have to examine myself every day and discover my implicit bias that I have, and try to understand it and try to weed it out of my life. And it's a lifelong process. Lifelong process. Sometimes white people will get a little defensive also, because they have ancestors who fought for the Confederacy. Let me just give you some simple advice. You are not guilty for anyone else's sins, okay? You are not guilty of what your ancestors did. Like if your ancestors were slave owners, you are not personally responsible for that. So you don't have to feel guilty about that. But what you have to do is know that you have this implicit racial bias, and you have to try to discover it and find out why it's there and get it out of your life and become better and better over the course of your life. And no, you weren't responsible for slavery, but I can tell you this: everyone except the enslaved, and maybe some Native Americans and brown people, benefited from the institution of slavery. You did not have to own slaves to benefit from slavery. So everybody is culpable, and you don't have to apologize for your ancestors, but you can say, I'm sorry that slavery happened. I'm sorry that all of these injustices have kept going on during my lifetime, and it never seems to go away. And you can say, and now I am going to do what I can to bring peace to my community, to see people as people. And it does not mean colorblind. Nobody's colorblind, okay? I can see that somebody has black skin. Little kids can see that. But you develop the negative connotation to the color of someone's skin. You learn that after you're born. You're not born with it. You learn that after you're born by cues that your family and the community give you. And you continue on with those cues because it's a matter of your own survival. It's like a survival instinct, to fit into your own community. So it's very complicated. I can't get into it all today, but and maybe this wasn't what everybody bargained for today, but I hope I've at least encouraged you to go look at the resources. Go find out about your history, about your state's history, about the laws, and make yourself more informed, and just examine your own hearts. That's all it is. It's examining your own heart and weeding it out. Okay. So isn't this a beautiful view? Can you see that? So this is one of my favorite views. There's the American flag sticking over there. There's the beautiful part of the garden that I see. So I think we have pretty much enough heavy stuff to look at today, but I thought, do you really want to, I thought to myself, where can I sit and talk about this stuff? Well, I thought this was a perfect place. It's peaceful. It's got beautiful flowers and birds, and we need peace, don't we? We need to sit and just think think about our own empathy. You know, where is it? How we treat people is important. It really is. So I'm just going to leave you now. I'll leave you just to sit and look at the garden a little while longer, and then I will sign off. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I hope wherever you are well and safe. Thank you so much for joining us today.